Welcome, everyone. Hi, I'm Carla Ellard. I'm the photo curator and archivist at the Wittliff Collections. I'm delighted to see you all here. We're honored to present discoveries and present this major exhibition of Geoff Winningham's photography. This is a labor of love. David Coleman, our director, sends his regrets. He couldn't make it today, but David, myself, and Geoff started planning this exhibition about a year ago, and it's been a wonderful journey, and we're going to get right started, but I just wanted to quickly thank all of the Wittliff staff who helped get us here, and that includes the student staff. I also want to introduce Geoff and Bill Broyles. With a career spanning more than 50 years, Geoff Winningham has become one of Texas's most important photographers. He has received 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, 5 NEA grants, and has produced 15 photography books. Geoff is the Lynette S. Autry Chair in the Humanities Professor of Art at Rice University, where he teaches photography. Geoff also directs the Pozos Art Project, a nonprofit enterprise offering art and photography opportunities to children in Texas and Mexico. Our program this afternoon is a conversation between Geoff Winningham and Bill Broyles. Bill is journalist and a founding editor of Texas Monthly, and we're honored that he is joining us today to lead us in conversation. So please join me in welcoming Bill and Geoff.
Thank you all for coming. And I think, Geoff, you had wanted to say a couple of things of thanks here.
Yeah, I do want to. Is it sound okay? Can you hear me? Okay. First of all, I want to thank David Coleman. I'm so sad he couldn't be here today. I want to thank David, and I want to thank Carla Ellard, who, well, as Bill said, really did well by me, as an understatement, in putting this show together. It's been a labor of love for me. Actually, it was 15 months ago when David emailed me and said, we would like you to do a big show at the Wittliff Collections. Would you be interested? And, you know, I didn't have to think about that at all. I wrote back, yes. And I think I might have asked, how big? And I think he said, come see. And I came, and he showed me all this space. And I thought, wow, an opportunity of a lifetime. So I really poured myself into this for almost 15 months. But I also had the extraordinary kind of guidance and criticism and thoughts at every step of the way, from the title, to, which photographs to put in, which ones to pull out. It was a wonderful collaboration. Lida Guz, I hope I'm pronouncing her last name right. Guz, Lida. Lida provided the graphics for the show. Everybody chipped in, and it was really a wonderful collaboration. So I'm so proud of the show. I'm a little overwhelmed, everybody here, but I'm comforted by a guy that I admire beyond words, who's been a friend for many years, and I'm counting on him to pull me through.
It is an incredible show. Please take the time to look at it. It extends all the way around into the room around here behind me, as well as, actually, Geoff and I do go back a long way, and I have to say, we're going to quibble about definitions here a little bit, but he is the first true artist I ever met in my life, coming from Baytown, Texas. There was this guy next door to us at the Thresher office doing the Rice Annual. Now, I'm just going to show you something. Most annuals look like this, right? And you open them and you have pages with also captions and things people did and all that. Geoff did his annual like this. And it was full of these extraordinary photographs from angles you've never seen before, like up and down and across and here, and no captions at all. Just these amazing images of people and the experiences they had on campus, and looking at this Rice community and this culture in a whole other way. And I think one Rice football player called him up and say, "Hey, Winningham, there's a tree outside my window you didn't take a picture of." This book that I held up, that was Geoff's first published book. This one is one of the latest, and it is an extraordinary book that not only has words in it, unlike the first of your book, but it has Geoff's words. And along the way with becoming an extraordinary photographer, he became an extraordinary writer as well, an extraordinary storyteller, and we'll hear more about this. But this book and Geoff's other books, plug, are on sale here today. So please stop and buy them because they're extraordinary. So I have to say one more thing, which is I walked in here and saw this exhibit taken from a small selection of the photographs over Geoff's lifetime. And it really, to me, was so moving because each and every one of these photographs, Geoff's on the other side. It's as much about him as it is about the photographs he's taken. And it's a chronicle of his entire life. And so, Geoff, one thing, I want to talk about two things first. One, why it's called Discoveries, and why you did it in chronological order, because we talked a lot about this, and what you say about this is extraordinary.
I'll answer the second question first, why it's in the order,
Yes.
that it's in chronological order. I think that fundamentally, without thinking about it or worrying about it, I'm a storyteller. I love to put pictures in a sequence that tell a story, and this is the story of my life as a photographer. I mean, there are things that are missing that are somewhat important. None of them are photographs from Arkansas. I decided to narrow it down to just Texas and Mexico, but that's 95% of my work. So the reason it's in the order that it's in is because this is the order it happened in. I mean, the photographs of wrestling are the first, basically, with one exception, the first published photographs. And the pictures at the end of the Day of the Dead in Mexico are more or less the last. There have been a few more since, but that's the reason they're in that order. And what was your first question?
Your statement of intent starts with a quote
discovery.
from Cartier-Bresson about discovery.
Yeah, why the
discovering the
title?
world and discovering yourself.
Yeah. So about halfway through the year of planning and bringing the show about, David and Carla and I were sitting around the table, and we were looking at the rough layout I had put together for the show and tweaking it a little bit. And we got to talking about, okay, what are we going to title this show? And titles aren't really kind of necessary. It could have just been Photographs by Geoff Winningham, Texas and Mexico, 1970 to 2024. It could have been just that. But I felt if we could come up with a title, it would be engaging to the audience. It would bring people in, and could be beautiful to have a title. But what? And the first time we talked about it, we didn't get anywhere. We just threw out some ideas, none of which sounded good. And sometime between that meeting and the next one, and we were meeting like once a month, but what came to my mind was this marvelous little passage that the great French photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson wrote in his landmark book, Decisive Moment, which had been a point of great inspiration to me when I first saw it as an undergraduate student. And he says, in so many words in his introduction, there's this sentence or two where he says that photography is a constant reciprocal process by which we discover the world as we discover ourselves. And that struck me as pretty profound. Very simple thought, but a very powerful thought. And I think that in the process of gathering these pictures together from beginning to end, I think I might have been aware clearly for the first time the degree to which these pictures define me, in that, this is my life. I discovered myself in the process of photography, meaning the things that I found, photographed, studied, put together as books and occasionally as shows, those things shape me as to who I am, how I see the world. And this show and all that's here is collectively who I've been. And I found it as I discovered the world.
You know, the thing that you can also see here is not only your extraordinary curiosity, but your amazing sense of sympathy and empathy for the people whose photographs you're taking. Mm-hmm. There's no judgment in these pictures. There's no looking down on anyone. There's a sense of wonder, and I think Marvels is one of the titles of your book. And part of what I've always loved about you, the whole 60 years or plus I've known you, is just your boundless curiosity about the world. It's almost like you were that boy with his first camera, and out think, oh my God, I can take photographs with this. And that same boy is in that last photograph around the corner, don't you think?
Yes. Yeah. You know, I tried to write a little bit about it in the statement beginning the show. You know, what got me interested in photography was a camera. I was a curious and kind of hobby obsessed kid. I was making model airplanes and getting into yo-yo contests and things like that. When I saw this camera sitting in the drugstore where I worked, and it was like just, first of all, physically it was beautiful. All the knobs and dials on it, and the lens so shiny and everything. It was just a beautiful object. And then the idea that if I could learn to operate that thing, that I could go out and make pictures or take pictures of things, that sounded kind of magical. So that camera got me into it. And it was only once I had studied the camera and the instruction book that I realized, in order for this thing to work, it's magic, I have to go find the subject, okay? And then I began finding subjects. First it was my friends. I did portraits of my friends, and I made a little simple photo book of portraits of my friends. It got lost somehow in all the family moves, but that was really my kind of first book. But my point is that the camera has been my reason to explore and my way of bringing home, of taking and bringing home and sharing the things that interest me, delight me the most.
Wow. You know, you talk about this, when you see the whole thing, it's a story of not just the worlds you move through, but your life itself. Mm-hmm. And I think it's interesting metaphor for all of us is that we all have memories, right, of things we've seen and done and places we've gone to and people we've loved, and they come and go for us, and you might have a few snapshots, but to have your memories of your basic creative life for real, on the wall, all the way around the room, is a magical thing.
It's a magical thing, and it's a very emotional thing for me. Now, you know, I look at the pictures of the wrestlers even. I think I was telling you when we were hanging the show, I was hanging a picture of the wrestling that I had not exhibited before. I had printed it for the show, and it was the great wrestler Wahoo McDaniel. And I was hanging the show, I was thinking to myself, God, I can't wait to show this to Wahoo. Wahoo's been dead 20 years. There's no showing it to Wahoo. But I've still got him. You know, I've got a
right over there.
Yeah, a rendering of him. Yeah.
There's a certain immortality, isn't it, in art? And I called you, we had this discussion earlier. I said, Geoff, you were the first true artist I ever met, and probably still the artist that's inspired me the longest and over my whole life. And we were across the hall from each other at Rice, and neither of us really were fitting in, and I found my place through the Rice Thresher, and Geoff found his place through photography. And so that was 60 plus years ago. And then we're fortunate to have here a couple of really important Texas Monthly people, Mike Levy, who was the founder of Texas Monthly, and Greg Curtis, who was the first person I hired and the second editor. And the photograph in the back, the gold lame, the lame pants right there, that was in the second issue of Texas Monthly. And so, talk a little bit about that too.
Can't say
if you don't
enough.
mind.
Texas Monthly was so important to me in the early mid 70s into the 80s. For example, the high school football. I can't remember whether it was Paul Burka or Greg Curtis. One of them called me from Texas Monthly and said, "Hey, Geoff, we just noticed that there's this football team in Northeast Texas, Big Sandy, and they haven't lost a game in 4 years. They're like 45-0, and they're going to Jacksboro, Texas this weekend to play groom for the state championship. We thought you might want to be there." Okay. I mean, what a tip-off, okay? So I go to Jacksboro, and for the first time ever, realize high school football is indeed a civil religion in this place, okay? I remember after the game, the Big Sandy team won again, and they gathered together in the center of the field at the end of the game, and the coach, Jim Norman, asked the team captain, Gary Chalk, to lead them in a prayer. And Gary Chalk said, in so many words, almost verbatim, he said, "Thank you, God, for letting us play together as a team. Thank you for Coach's guidance. Thank you for this whole experience that will bless us for the rest of our lives. We just wish that Coach had a big house where we could all go and live together for the rest of our lives." And I thought, wow, this is something. So that was the beginning of 3 years of photographing high school football. Then there was the time when Greg called me, long before the days of email, of course, okay, and said, "Geoff, Jan Morris is coming to Texas." I didn't know who Jan Morris was, but my ignorance. I mean, one of the great writers in the world at the time, and hugely important person. She began her career as James Morris, the eminent historian, climbed Mount Everest with Sir Hilary and reported back, and then became Jan Morris, one of the most important writers of that time, okay? He said, "She's coming to Texas. She's going to do 3 stories. And we're hoping you will be able to kind of follow in her footsteps and photograph." What an amazing opportunity. She wrote her story about Houston very quickly, and I thought she was writing about Buffalo Bayou. I had lived in Houston for all those years at that point, 10, 12 years. I didn't know what Buffalo Bayou was, but she started writing about it. It's the womb of our city, our ancient hollow. And so that began not only my opportunity to follow in her footsteps and photograph all the things she photographed, but my near lifelong obsession after that with Buffalo Bayou. So Texas Monthly was always kind of channeling these things to me. And then when I had something that I had no place to publish particularly, like a collection of photographs of county courthouses or photographs of the border town of Nuevo Laredo, I would contact Texas Monthly and have a portfolio of pictures in there. So that magazine was just very crucial in terms of kind of keeping me engaged, keeping me out, discovering new things. I can't say enough about how important that was.
And one of the things we loved doing from the very beginning of Texas Monthly is not just writing stories, but telling stories visually. And we've been publishing great photography from the very beginning, and you were our first great photographer. And I think you want maybe to talk a little bit. One of the things you'll see in this, and we're not necessarily going in chronological order in the talk, but is each of these, so many of these are about ceremonies, rites of passage, challenges. They're about festivals and interaction between the human and the divine, and portals. And you don't get into these worlds just by walking up with your camera and saying, hey, can I take your picture? One of the things that Geoff has also done is have this endless adventure of going in and with this kind of sunny disposition and personality, becoming friends with people and getting their trust and letting them see them in these intimate moments. And I'm really curious about talking about this because I'd love to hear a couple of stories about this. I know you have some about the wrestling, and also I want to get to the one about the De Los Santos family.
Oh,
We're in this there's a remarkable photograph. I've got three of my favorites are the one of Galveston with the Piers, which I want to talk about, and the wrestling one of Bronco and whatever, on the cover, and the De Los Santos one, which looks like a Velázquez painting. It's extraordinary. It's in the other room. So can you talk a little bit about that, about the incredible adventure you've had, the odyssey you've had doing these photographs, and the people you've met, and how you really got into the...
And, first of all, I would say, how would I ever end up in the De Los Santos family for the September 28th, 29th San Miguel Fiesta? How would I ever end up there if I weren't going there to photograph? I mean, that was my reason for being there. It was my entree, my reason for being there. So I started going to San Miguel Zinacapan up in the mountains of Puebla. Probably started in the mid-1980s. But toward the end of the 90s, I had been there 10 or 12 times. A great village with an ancient kind of history and a great tradition of festivals. And Miguel de los Santos and his family would put me up. There were no hotels around, and I would sleep on their dirt floor with some hay underneath. And that became kind of part. They were so kind to me and so sweet to me. After about the fourth visit there, I said to them one time, what can I bring you? I'm going back to Texas, and I'll come back, for the next festival. What can I bring you? And without hesitation, Miguel said in Spanish, a popcorn maker. And I said, okay. So, I wasn't going to bring them just any old popcorn maker. I wasn't going to get the cheapest one I could buy. I went to Best Buy and got the best popcorn maker I could find. A big old, huge, fine popcorn maker. And I brought it to them, and they were overjoyed, and all the neighbors came as they put the corn. It was a neighborhood event when they, came over and plugged the popcorn popper in, and all the lights in the village went out. Took all the power out, It was the next day before they could find the transformer that had failed and get it. We almost destroyed the whole festival for popcorn.
I love that story. And the sequel to that is, if you see the photograph in the far right-hand corner, is a woman holding a baby. And this photograph was made in the 80s. And so what happened when you went back 30-something years later?
My wife Christian and I went 2 summers ago. We were thinking about doing a Day of the Dead trip that fall to Zinacapan. We thought we need to go first. And honestly, I couldn't even, it had been so long, 30-something years, I couldn't even remember exactly where the De Los Santos family house was in the village. But we picked up a guy in the nearby city, Quetzalan, who said, I know where they live. I know where it is, because he was from that village. So we drove into Zinacapan, the little village, maybe 100, 200 people, with our poodle, and then my silver Acura, which must have been a little like a spaceship landing in town, And he guided us right to their house, and we stopped the car, and before I could even get out, a young woman, probably in her 20s, early 30s, came walking out onto the porch, and I recognized her. That was the child that was a baby in the arms when I photographed. And so Christian and I went in with a box of photographs, big 16 by 20 color prints from 30 years earlier. I mean, we were enough like aliens landing for another planet already. And when we opened that box of color prints, and they just stood there in wonder, it was like, how can this be? The miracle of photography was so obvious. And it is a miracle. I mean, I feel like I've practiced a miracle all my working life. What is it? It may or may not be an art. I don't care. What it is a miracle. It's a miracle by which, things are preserved and live long beyond the time they're with us. So that was probably the strongest example I can remember of the miraculous nature of photography, just causing this overwhelming wonder. They're going through the box. Okay, there's Miguel and his wife, long past, and they're looking at those pictures, and we were like, some angels who had come to deliver some sort of profound truth, that they still live, these people, in these pictures.
That is, for those of us who write, to do a visual art like photography that captures every single one of these, using the Cartier-Bresson, is a decisive moment. But it's a moment that's long gone, right? And every one of these decisive moments has Geoff Winningham on the other side of it. And as Geoff's gotten older, and as the subjects in these photographs have passed on, the photograph's still there. It captures a moment forever. It's the spooky thing we were talking about. It's the spooky thing about mortality, and I don't know. You're on the line of like the living and the dead here, Geoff. I mean, and then so it's really appropriate to me that you did so much of the Day of the Dead work, because your photographs, in some ways, are just living examples of the Day of the Dead. They return
yeah.
again and again and again, and there they are. And so, one other story I'd love you to hear, to talk about, is the time you almost died doing photography, when you got gored. Oh, well, the other time when you got swept away in the Rio Grande. You could talk about both of them. I just know two of them. There might be more.
No, there have been a few dangers along the way, but yeah. So the goring by the bull. I was photographing the running of the bulls in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico, and I actually went twice. And the first time I didn't get any good pictures, and I thought to myself, "You just weren't brave enough." So the next time I got out in the street with them, and it's a long story, but basically, bull got me and trampled me and gored me. But there's no happy ending to that story, except that I'm alive.
Oh, you're still here. That's the happy ending.
Oh, yeah, that is true. Yeah, that when I was recovering in the hospital the next day, a guy came and brought my Leica camera to me. I had been in the street photographing with my Leica, and they took me to the hospital. I was bleeding profusely. Anyway, the next day, a guy brought my camera to me and said, I thought you might want this. And so my first question was, I wonder if it's still working. And so I looked at it, held it up like this, and released the shutter and advanced the film. My God, it's working. And then when I developed that film, there's a triptych at the end. The first one is the picture I took looking right at the bull before he came. The second one is like 2/3 black shape coming in from the left side of the frame, and the rest of it is looking up in the air. And then the third frame is looking up at the IV unit over my bed. But the story I want to tell them is the story of the satellite of Sputnik.
Oh, yeah.
May I tell this?
Well,
Because
this is the origin story.
Huh?
This is your origin story.
My origin story.
As a photographer.
Yes. When I got,
Please, pray tell.
Okay. So when I got my first camera, really I had no idea what to photograph. I photographed my friends, as I told you, but I didn't have any instructor, and I didn't have anybody really to learn from. I just was kind of playing with it. And I remember reading some book that said, if you keep the shutter open for a long time while the camera is still, things that are moving in front of the camera may be recorded as a blur or a line, And, in a great leap of 14-year-old imagination, I thought, wait a minute, Sputnik is coming over, okay? It was the time of Sputnik, when we were all worried about how the Russians were going to get, and it was a big deal. The satellite was going to be visible that night in the skies of Jackson, Tennessee. And I thought, if I get out there and open the shutter of my camera pointing up to the sky and have it focused on infinity, maybe the satellite will be bright enough, and maybe this will actually work where I'll get a picture of the satellite. So I did that. I got out there at night. It was like wee hours of the morning, tripod, setting my camera up, pointing it up past the house toward the sky, and here came Sputnik, through the sky, and its light was like blinking every now and then as it went over like that. And my camera shutter's open, and I'm keeping everything very still. And then when when Sputnik was gone, I, closed up my camera, went down to the dark room, and developed the film. And by God, there it was, a line on the film, a straight line coming just like that. And then periodically, there was a brighter, slightly brighter spot on the line. I thought, I got it. So the next morning at breakfast, I brought the print to my father, and I said, look. And he was deeply impressed. He was deeply impressed, okay, to the point that he said, I'm taking this camera to the Jackson Sun, this photograph to the Jackson Sun, our local paper. And he did that morning. So 2 days later, it was a weekly paper. The paper came out, and on the front page is a headline. Jackson boy captures Sputnik with camera. All right, okay. So,
That's not the whole story.
So, he was so proud of me, and word got around, and at school, the teacher even said, Geoff, please bring the print and tell us all about it. Bring your camera and bring the print and explain it all to us. I said, oh, sure, okay. So I brought my camera with the tripod, and I brought the print. And I'm standing in front of the class, and I accidentally picked up the print, and at first was holding it upside down. And when I looked at it like that, I could not believe my eyes. It wasn't Sputnik. What I had photographed in my long exposure was the white rain gutter on the side of the house. Okay, and the little bright spots along the way, those were the brackets holding the gutter onto the house. And once you saw it, that's all you could see, so I just flipped it over the other side. Sputnik. Okay. So my first public photograph was a fraud. Okay.
Well, we've come a long way since there, Geoff. And those are, it's interesting that there's so many serendipitous moments, right, that you can get, that real or not, that go into this. And one of the ones that, what was I going to talk to you about? One of the things that I think you see here is an extraordinary record of different cultures. And you described yourself also, we were arguing about whether you were an artist or straight photographer, and I said, well, can't you just be both? And you said, well, I'm also a visual anthropologist. You want to talk about that a little bit, what that means?
Sure. I mean, it's a tricky thing to talk about, and if I'm not careful, I can sound like I'm, over-concerned with what in the world I am, which I just love to photograph. But basically, I'm much more comfortable with the word photographer as a descriptor. I'm a photographer. And so when someone says and suggests, that, you're an artist photographer, I get a little uneasy about that only because I think photographer's enough. In fact, it's more than enough. It seems to me that photography is clearly something truly extraordinary, whether you want to lump it as an art. I mean, for example, just the other day, I was getting prepared for a class to teach, and we were going to talk about photography as an art. So I looked up online the definition of art, and there are numerous websites that talk about the different categories of art, like painting, drawing, sculpture, music, performance. and then they skip to filmmaking or cinema. Photography's still not in the list, which I think is really reassuring. We still got a chance to just be photography, okay? But in the way that I have worked, I think I'm closer to being a visual anthropologist than I am to being an artist. And I don't know, I'm just kind of, it's a comforting thought to think that I'm making some sort of anthropological kind of record of things. It doesn't really matter. Whatever it is, it is. But yeah, that term art doesn't seem to be really necessary. But I want to mention something while we still have a few minutes here. I want to talk about inspiration for a minute. I want to throw this back to Bill Broyles and talk about how inspiration can come in the most unexpected sort of ways. Bill was from very, very early on an inspiration to all of us who knew him from college days and all, because of his amazing ability to do so many things well at an extraordinarily high level. One year, when I had finished kind of my first 3 books, all black and white, 35 millimeter photography, wrestling, rodeo, high school football, I was getting very interested in color photography. But color photography, as I had been taught in grad school and as I had understood the traditions of photography, black and white was serious photography. Color photography was commercial. Walker Evans even said one time, color photography is vulgar, okay? Maybe a little extreme, somebody pointed out. But Mr. Evans, you've been photographing with a color Polaroid camera for about 3 years, to which he said, it's very good for photographing vulgar things, okay? but anyway, there was this time when I wanted to go into color photography, and I was starting to, but I was feeling kind of weird about it. When we were having lunch one day, Bill was coming through Houston, we were talking, and Bill kind of stopped me gently, and he said, you know, Geoff, he said, I don't want to think of myself as a guy who does just one thing. Why can't we do a number of things? And I think maybe it was to the point where he was moving from editing major magazines to maybe writing TV series or films. I don't know. He was, you know, that's been, among other things, one of the primary inspirations of Bill, that he's done so many things well. And it's surprising in a way how those words, they not just comforted me. It was like, damn, if Bill Broyles can do a lot of things, I can try to do a lot of things. There's nothing wrong with breaking out of the mold, you know? Maybe that seems very naive and foolish of my part to even wonder why I could do it. But when you're doing something that seems to be going well, to change is not always easy to do. It's a little dangerous, kind of. And Bill, just one of many times he's inspired me. His words, you know, I think I like to try to do a number of things well. Isn't it funny how just a few words, when they come from the right person, are all you needed to hear?
Well, Geoff. I think that's a good time we can start taking questions from the audience.
Yeah, if there are.
And thank you. But
Somebody back there.
Oh, I get to go first.
Oh, okay, Amy.
I'm married to one of your children who is also an artist, and I've seen her art change with her tools, and I would like to know how your tools have changed and how that's impacted your work.
did everybody hear that question? Talk about your tools and how they've impacted your work.
Really good question. I mean, that we could answer that in a long. I'll be brief. But basically, as you probably all suspect, the big change in the tools in my toolbox have been the tsunami-like effect of digital photography. You know, that I was taught and trained as a photographer who did film, whether it was Kodachrome positive or black and white negative. I was trained to shoot film. And when the computer came along and people started making digital photographs, my first impression for really quite a few years was, this is the easiest possible way to make the most possible ugly photographs, okay? Because the pictures I was seeing, I think, were mostly from computer people who were testing the technology, and they would make them over sharp and oversaturated, and they were just ugly. And so I stayed away from it for a long time. And then at some point, 2007 exactly, when all of my students were shooting digital, I thought, I need to learn how to do this, or I can't be a photography teacher anymore. So I went online and I got, I was going to buy a digital Nikon camera, but then I succumbed to my traditional love of Leica cameras, and I bought the first Leica digital camera, an M8. Had a little 10 megapixel digital camera, and I started photographing with it. And from the first time I put the image on the screen, I thought, oh my God, that's the most beautiful color photograph I've ever seen in my life, you know. So digital is, I think, sort of God's gift to photographers, okay? But I think that it has its problems. It can lead you in. I don't like the fact that you see the photograph right after you take it. I mean, I succumb to it because you almost have to. But I think it leads to less interesting photographs. I think that if I could turn off my monitor, which I can't, I won't let myself, I'm too curious. But I think if I could turn it off, I'd probably make more interesting pictures. So my toolbox has become 90% digital photography. I still love to shoot with the view camera and shoot film, but carrying that big, heavy camera around is something that I don't do as comfortably as I used to. And then while I'm adequate in Photoshop, and sometimes at certain things better than adequate, I'm still not a digital whiz. I have students in my first year photo classes that are better at Photoshop than I am. So I'm kind of playing catch up still, probably always will be. But I love digital, but I do wonder sometimes if it might have set me back.
Interesting. Let me just add something to this. One of my favorite photographs, which is the photograph of the Balinese room after Hurricane Ike, and all you see is the pillars, and looks like something out of the Odyssey or ancient Greece and the ocean. That was one of the first ones you took with that Leica camera, right?
10 megapixel camera, and it's such a beautiful color print, such a beautiful. How do you argue with that? I mean, you know, the film camera at the time, and that was shot in right after Hurricane Ike. But anyway, if I had shot that on film, even the best color film with a 35 millimeter size camera, it couldn't have come close to the quality of that digital print. So the quality is there. It's other issues. It's the amount that you photograph, in part. You know, if you're out with a roll of 36 exposures on your roll, you tend to shoot more carefully. Now, that's not always good to shoot carefully, but somehow with digital, there's a tendency to just kind of click, 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 keep going, okay? And you got to be wary of that. And then again, I wish I didn't see the pictures until I'm all done. But I'm ambivalent about digital.
And
obviously.
just one little footnote again. Those view cameras, you see there's a case with the different cameras in here. And everything that in those whole Mexico things, Geoff carried that huge camera everywhere, including up to get a photograph of one of my favorites, which is the beach where Cortez landed in 1519. There is also one little scavenger hunt. Is out of all these photographs, there's only one that was taken with an iPhone. Has anybody been able to spot what it is?
Yeah, never spot it. It's too good. I mean, I don't mean that in terms of, it's too good relative to the other print. It's just as good technically as the others. You would not spot it. But it made a photograph that my then $10,000 Leica couldn't make. Yeah.
Okay.
Tell them which one it is.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, look.
If you go to, yeah, exactly. If you go around the back, in this room here, there's a photograph of Pátzcuaro and the island at night, and that's the iPhone photograph. It's spectacular. Okay, next question.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey,
So, would you share with us your decision between becoming a photographer and law school? I find that fascinating because I'm at the age where I have my son, my stepkids, my friends' kids. They're all in those career crossroads, including watching Max. So, I always found that story very fascinating, and your struggle and your father's reaction.
What was the question again? Was it about
Your choice between law school and becoming a
the
photographer.
Dr. Isle story?
yeah. I'm going to use that question to pay homage to someone that I forever owe homage to. You know, I was a senior in college, getting ready to graduate, had been accepted to go to Vanderbilt Law School, and thought I would. My father was a lawyer, my brother was a lawyer, my uncle was a lawyer. They'd all gone to Vanderbilt. And my father, that was, there was just enough Atticus Finch in him that it was a noble calling to me to become a lawyer. And so I thought that's what I would do. And Jerry O'Grady, English prof at Rice, who was my mentor, we're sitting down one evening and he's saying, what you going to do when you graduate? And I said, well, I'm probably going to go to Vanderbilt Law School. I'm accepted there. And he said, why would you do that? And I said, well, my father, my uncle, all that. It's a pretty noble calling. He said, yeah, sure it is. He said, but is that what you want to do? And I said, well, yeah, I guess so. I said, what else would I do? He said, well, you could be a photographer. And I said, incredibly naive, but I remember it. So I said, Jerry, what good would that do anybody? And he said, it would give people pleasure and yourself as well. That was a truly inspiring moment. It's still inspiring to me. It's inspiring not just for what he did for me, but the very idea that that's what great teachers do, great mentors do. And I was so blessed to have O'Grady as a mentor, to have Walter, all those great people we had at Rice at the time on the faculty. So I decided to try to be a photographer without giving up the idea that, well, maybe I won't be any good at this, but I'm going to try. So I stalled a year, worked for a year, applied to the Institute of Design in Chicago, which was one of the few really good photography graduate programs in the country at the time. And to my amazement, I got accepted, even though I'd never had a photography class. So I went there. I did okay. I wasn't the star of the class, that's for sure. But I got it done. I got out. By then, I had one child already and another on the way. And yet I thought, let's see if we can do this for another few years. So I got a job teaching, and I started photographing, and then I found the wrestling, and then it had its own momentum. So it's not like at any one point, it wasn't until the early 1970s that I said, several years out of grad school, I said, yeah, this is what I'm going to do, and not look back.
Yeah. Did
I answer your question? Okay.
I think you can safely let that law school application lapse, Jeff.
What?
You can let the law school application lapse.
Right.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
You have been dancing around another aspect of your life, and that's teaching. We are in an academic setting here. You work in an academic setting. How has your photography and your teaching evolved together? How do your students, besides technology, affect what you do if they do? And how have you sensed that your teaching and your mentoring has affected them?
Okay, Jeff.
Great question, but one that I'm going to try to answer here in less than. First of all, I do want to say that teaching and being in touch with young people year after year is like having this. It's like having a channel of youthful optimism coming through your life all the time. Whether you are making a deep influence on them as photographers or not. I am always excited about the possibility of sharing my love of photography with my students. Okay, so, and they've come through my life, and I think they've been invigorating and encouraging in many ways. On the other hand, on the other side of it as well, it has provided me enough financial security that I can go out and spend 8 years photographing the Gulf Coast of Mexico, or even a year photographing professional wrestling. It's provided me the financial security to be able to do the things I love to do. I mean, when you're a college prof, particularly at a great school like Rice, you have 3 things you're supposed to do in this increasing order. You're supposed to teach well, that's 3rd. You're supposed to serve the department and the university and the community well, that's fine. But the most important thing is you're supposed to go out and do what you do, whether it's scientific research or photography or paint. You're supposed to go and do that to the best of your ability. What other job pays you to do what you love to do? So I have to say, teaching has been not only kind of financial sustenance for me, it's also been a place in which my work has been appreciated, where I'm patted on the back for doing well. It's just a great way to live and work, to have students that you share your work with, to have colleagues that you can interact with. I feel blessed to be in academia.
Yeah,
Did I answer that question? I don't know if I did or not. How has it affected,
And I'm sure you've mentored many, many people the way you were so beautifully mentored too, I'm sure.
Yeah, while you guys were talking, the details of the piece behind you was starting to get imprinted on my mind. While you guys were, not that I wasn't listening to what you guys were talking, but the piece behind you, the details were starting to get imprinted on my mind. How was it shot? What's the story behind that photo?
the big print behind
Yeah.
it? That was shot with the very camera that's on display in this other room out here, in the room with the Mexican Gulf Coast pictures. There are 3 cameras. There's the big 8x10 view camera. There's a 35 millimeter Leica camera, and then there's a 6x17 centimeter Fuji panoramic camera. Shoots a negative about 7 inches by 2 inches. And it was shot with that camera at a kind of a slow shutter speed on a tripod along Buffalo Bayou. Is that what you meant?
Not exactly.
What?
What's the story about how you got that shot? How did you get there? How did you come to take that particular shot?
Well, for about a year, I was exploring and photographing Buffalo Bayou, okay? Started when Jan Morris started her story about Houston about it, and I went and started photographing. Then I came back to it years later. I was living near the bayou, so I started each week or each weekend after I would trace the bayou further and further back until I finally found its source out in Fort Bend County. Along my travels back to its source, I found this site in what's called Terry Hershey Park off of I-45 near Derry Ashford Road. And it's a park. And at that point, the bayou, as you can see, is a fairly narrow channel. And after a rain, like in this situation, the water is rushing through there, and there are these beautiful overhanging trees. So it's one of the most picturesque spots on Buffalo Bayou that I found in my kind of searching back that way.
I want to just add to that really quick. The book I just showed you about the Gulf is from Sabine Pass all the way down past Veracruz. And the story in the book, again, Geoff's had Jan Morris, Al Reinert, Richard Rodriguez, some really quite amazing Nobel Prize-winning people write his text. But these last books, he's written them himself. And they are extraordinary accounts of these journeys that I feel like, before I just would sort of, read the text, that'd be good, and stare at the photographs. Now I read the text and then look at the photographs. Because there's such an extraordinary thing of you becoming a writer, which I think is, so far as trying something new. That book you'd always told me inspired you, Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, which is Walker Evans and James Agee. and they divided up their job. You do it all now. Really impressive.
Wow.
Really impressive.
From him. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right.
Do we have time for one more question? Maybe two more?
Hi, Jeff.
What? Oh, where? Oh, back here. Okay.
You've talked a lot about the decisive moment. Were there ever points where you weren't at the right place at the right time, and how did you move past that and keep shooting?
Oh, I'm sure thousands, yes. Do I remember them? I mean, if you pointed me to a particular photograph, I might be able to remember, things that I'm looking back and I'm seeing that picture of Hank Snow coming out of the door with his butterfly costume on, okay? And I'm remembering trying to find a time and a place to photograph him. And the night before he had performed, and I had not been able to get close to him. So when he came out, there were people all in front of me. I'm not really, I guess, answering your question, except that for every picture that works, there were all those situations where that you either couldn't get close enough, I couldn't get close enough to the subject, or something interrupted it at that point. It's hard to remember, after all these years, the things that didn't work, but there were thousands of them, I'm sure. I wish I could think of one. Here's one where I was helped a lot. The decisive moment can occur often when you have good advice. The picture of Emil Mascaras here, flying off the rope, off the post on the side there. Paul Bosch was the wrestling promoter who gave me permission to photograph. And Paul was also an amateur photographer. So when I came and started photographing, he started photographing too. On that particular night, I was very far to the right of the position that the photograph was taken from. And as Emil Mascaras climbed the post, Paul Bosch started pointing to my left, okay? So the decisive moment happened in large part because Paul gave me a cue. So, then I scooted, I kept looking at him like, how far? And then he found it there, okay? And so when Emil Mascaras dived, I was in the right place.
That's great.
Now, how many times was I in the wrong place? 10,000. It's just hard to remember which ones.
Okay, one more question from the audience.
Yes. How do you think, if so, AI will affect the world of photography?
Good question.
I have no idea, but it scares me to death. Sometimes, I don't know much about AI, but the more I learn, the more it worries me. It's not just photography, but it's also about kind of writing, and I don't know where it's all going, but it really scares me. Part of the problem I had with digital photography from the beginning was that Photoshop was clearly the beginning of the end of photography as evidence of anything, okay? And still is, okay? So that was just Photoshop. Where's AI going to go? I don't know, but it seems to me that the disastrous possibilities are endless. And I don't like to sound like a pessimist, but it does sound, maybe it will just be so different and wonderfully different that I'll be sitting around creating pictures in which I put this there or that, creating something out of nothing. I don't know. It's just not my inclination.
Yeah, it's the beauty of this exhibit that you all are seeing may be late stage this kind of photography, because it is what this eye has seen and witnessed in the world. And what AI and digital does, and we see it in film too, is it lets your imagination be what you see. You can transmit your imagination onto the prints. But this man stood in front of every single one of these things, climbed, swam, crawled, stayed up late, visited hundreds of times, and in his humility and his determination and his unbelievable dedication, he's produced this extraordinary work. So let's give Geoff Winningham a great big hand.
Thank you so much.
And there's one more thing. This is a beautiful way to end, one photographer to another. But we're at the Wittliff collection, and Geoff wants to end with a story about Bill Wittliff.
If there were one person that I could wish to be here, it would be Bill Wittliff. I knew Bill not as a close friend, but as a kind of a steady friend over many years. I met him. He had just bought a Nichromat camera. He was still doing Encino Press, but he had bought a Nichromat camera, and he had been invited to this ranch in South Texas or northern Mexico to photograph vaqueros, and he wanted some advice. Like, am I getting the film in the camera right? And what is depth of field? Things like that. And so I spent an evening with him, giving him some tips, and then he went off, absolute beginner, and made these extraordinary photographs of vaqueros, So I just admired him beyond words for his amazing talent. And from time to time, I would come to Austin, and if I were lucky, he would be free enough to see me, and I'd go to his office, and, I'd see all these projects in process around him. And one day, Robert Redford called him on the phone, and, I felt like I was in touch with this enormous talent that was part of the bigger world. It was so inspiring just to be around him. And just before he died, just a year or so before he died, we did a show of his work in Houston, and he came. And so I wish you were here. I really wish you were here.